I'm Elliot Chodoff, and welcome to Conflict Uncovered, your go-to podcast for in-depth analysis on the complex and dynamic conflicts shaping the Middle East, Israel, and the world. Join us as we delve into the latest developments, historical contexts, and the geopolitical forces at play. We bring you the insights you need to understand the issues that matter most. Stay informed, stay engaged, and uncover the truths behind the headlines.
It's August 21st, Wednesday afternoon here in Israel, and we're in the middle of the week of the second Last Chance Summit. That's the last chance after the last chance to bring peace in our time to the Middle East, return the hostages, end all of the wars, and, well, I don't know what. I'm going to call this Last Chance 2.0 because I imagine the next week we're going to have Last Chance 3.0 and probably go on to Last Chance to the N+1 as long as the Americans feel that there's some sort of chance that it's going to work. And what I'd like to do today is talk about why it's not working. The word this morning was that American and Israeli officials have said that the talks are on the verge of collapse. I think that's something of a misstatement. There aren't many talks to collapse, and I'll go into that in a bit. But I want to start with one of Eliot's iron laws. In the course of our discussions, you'll learn all of Eliot's iron laws. Some of them are rather simple and straightforward, like never try to take Moscow in the winter. It's been tried, it never ends well. And some that are more complicated, and I'll be going into one in a moment. They all are kind of Sun Tzu style rules. In other words, they shouldn't just be taken at face value, and I don't claim to be anywhere near on the level of Sun Tzu, but try to at least copy him a bit and his principles of the art of war. So today's principle is that any policy, any plan that looks like a Rube Goldberg contraption is likely to fail. If you don't know who Rube Goldberg was and what his contraptions look like, Google it. It's a lot of fun. They're basically the longest, most inefficient way to get something simple done. And it's the antithesis of a very important rule that I believe in, although it's not mine, which is called KISS, which is keep it simple, stupid. And that's it's important in military and in many other things in planning and implementation. So the rule today is Rube Goldberg is a lot of fun, but his contraptions make very poor models for planning and policy. And if we look at the American approach to the last chance summits, we'll see that they look very, very much like Rube Goldberg contraptions, trying to convince someone to do something that they don't want to do when you have no leverage over them. And if they do what they don't want to do, that's going to have an effect on other people who are going to make decisions based on that, and everything's going to fall neatly into place. And as I said, peace in our time. So what are the failures? And where does this Rube Goldberg come apart basically at the seams? First, there's a fundamental premise, and the Americans have stated it. Secretary Blinken has said it many times. Nobody gains from an escalation in the current conflict in the Middle East. That's simply not true. You could argue that Iran doesn't want an immediate escalation. You might even argue that Hezbollah doesn't want an immediate escalation, although that's a little thin, but let's go with it. One thing is absolutely clear. Sinwar, the leader of Hamas, desperately wants an escalation right now. He's wanted an escalation since October 7th. Part of his strategy of the attack on October 7th and everything since has been what he calls the unification of the resistance, the unification of the fronts, meaning an attack on Israel, not just by Hamas in Gaza, but also Hamas West Bank, Hezbollah, militias, Iran, Houthis, Klingons, Martians, anybody who can get in on the party will jump in and go after Israel, and that will give him what he wants, which is the destruction of Israel. Now, he went into the 7th assuming that Hezbollah was going to jump in and join him. He was wrong, but there's always a second chance. And now, in the aftermath of our elimination of Fuad Shukr a few weeks ago, Hezbollah is threatening a massive response. Today, we had a routine response where 50 rockets were fired at Katsrin. A number of them fell into the city, caused tremendous damage. We're seeing considerable rise in Hezbollah rocket fire and drone attacks, but that's still what everybody's calling, that's just routine. So we're still waiting for that. Iran has threatened a massive response, retaliation, for the elimination of Ismail Haniyeh, the head of Hamas at the time, in Tehran, when he was there as their guest for the presidential inauguration. And the Americans are trying desperately to prevent all of the above, which I think is laudable, but they're tying it into the ceasefire agreement. And that's not too clever, because the guy who ultimately is going to decide is Yahya Sinwar. And when you tell Mr. Sinwar, if you agree to this, this will alleviate some tensions, it will prevent an escalation, it might prevent a regional war. Sinwar says to himself, why would I ever want to do that? I went into this for the exact opposite reason. So he can make 1,000,001 excuses. But the tying of the ceasefire into reduction of tensions, particularly with Iran and Hezbollah, was a huge strategic mistake on the part of the United States. Basically expecting Sinwar to do the opposite of what he really wants. So that's premise number one. Premise number two, that Hamas is holding hostages in order to trade them. And by the way, this is an Israeli error in premise as well. Hostages are taken by political organizations. I'm not talking about criminal organizations. Criminals take hostages. They kidnap people for ransom. The ransom can be cash, it can be goods, but typically they kidnap for ransom. State organizations, and typically fascist, Nazi, and terrorist organizations, sometimes synonymous, take hostages also as a guarantee, as a threat. The Nazis did it all the time. They would take hostages and then shoot them as retaliation if there was an act of resistance. Holding hostages and shooting them is a tried and true formula by fascists and Nazis. It doesn't work terribly well, but it's something that they do, and it has nothing to do with an exchange. In other words, getting the hostages out by buying them out is not part of the reason for taking them. Sinwar and Hamas are holding hostages for that reason, not as bargaining chips, but as shields, as an insurance policy, as a threat. If you do this, we will kill them. And by the way, under those circumstances, they don't have to treat them particularly well. They just have to keep some of them alive. And we've been seeing more and more evidence of that as time goes on, both from released hostages and told of the horrors that they went through in captivity. And of course, the bodies of the hostages that we're bringing back, 6 this week, died in Hamas captivity, either murdered by Hamas or kept in places where Israeli strikes would kill them. In either case, expendable from the point of view of Hamas. The bodies were not expendable, and this is something else that I think is an important aside to all of this. Bringing back their bodies is not only important from an Israeli, Jewish, humanitarian point of view, so that families have closure, but it means that every single one of those bodies is one that Israel will not have to negotiate over and release terrorists for sometime in the future, as we have in the past, particularly with Hezbollah on a number of occasions. So Hamas is holding them. They're body snatchers. They're ghouls. There's no better way to describe them. Zombies who are holding bodies as bargaining chips. And bodies for them are bargaining chips. But live hostages are a mix. They've got a lot of them. Now, many fewer than they had to begin with, but whether they have 50 or 60 or 70, that's more than enough. Sinwar learned by his own experience that holding one Israeli hostage is enough to negotiate with. He was released in the Gilad Shalit deal in which over 1,000 terrorists were let go, released from prison, serving, as in Sinwar's case, life sentences, all in order to get a single Israeli soldier back alive and in one piece. And I'm not going to go into the commentary on it, but I think it's great that he was brought back alive. But Sinwar understands one Israeli is enough to negotiate for. So why hold so many? Why not just give them up? Because that brings us to the second part. He wants them for insurance. They're his human shields. The reason Israel is not probing deeply into the tunnels under Khan Yunis to look for him is because we know that he has hostages. He's holding them there in order to protect himself. Those hostages are not up for negotiation. He may say they are because he's not going to tell the truth. But this is a Nazi-style hostage-taking. And every now and then, as we've seen, they'll put out a film of some hostages, kill them afterwards, or kill some of them afterwards, and it makes no difference to them. Israel, by saying that it wants them back dead or alive, and here the hostage families, well, I can fully understand their emotions, by saying we want our people back dead or alive, or basically telling Sinwar, you can kill a whole bunch of them, we'll take them back any way you want. Now, that's not the intent, but that's the message being heard by Sinwar and his tunnel. Last but not least, by calling it the last chance, and now we're in last chance 2.0, America has placed an urgency into this that is artificial beyond the real urgency. Let me explain myself. There's a real urgency to get the hostages out. Obviously, every day that they're in captivity, they're suffering, they're being tortured. What's being done to the young women is certainly indescribable, but to everybody, and as we've seen, and they're being killed. So there's an urgency to get them out. But by placing the artificial urgency of we've got to get them out this week or else, the United States is playing once again into the hands of Hamas. Now, Hamas didn't even bother to come to the Last Chance Summit. First of all, they're showing utter disdain, utter disinterest. They've already stated their case. This is what we want, and we're not budging from it. By not showing up, they're also placing themselves outside of all pressure. The only side that can be pressured now is Israel. Now, you know, the world's definition and the American definition of Israeli compromise is to give in to everything Hamas demands. That's compromise. They give 0, we give 100, and we meet in the middle between 0 and 100, which is 100 in their direction. Israel can be pressured. Israel can be cajoled. Hamas can't. Now, especially since the leadership has been officially handed over to Sinwar. It was already unofficially in his hands. Now that it's officially been handed over, the Hamas leaders who are living high and well in their luxury hotel in Qatar can't even be threatened by being thrown out of the hotel or even having to pay their bills, for God's sake, and certainly not being thrown out of the country, because everybody knows it won't do any good. They're not the people making the decisions. So in this brilliant move, all of the weight, all of the decision has been exclusively placed in Sinwar's hands, and Sinwar is basically saying, I'm not interested. Now, the Americans don't want to hear that. So when they don't want to hear something, they go deaf. And the deafness is, well, we're going to pressure Hamas. We're going to have the Egyptians speak to the Qataris, and the Qataris will speak to the Egyptians, and the Egyptians will speak back to the Qataris, and they're going to speak to the Hamas people in Qatar, who are going to speak to Sinwar, who's not speaking to anybody, and they're going to get him to become what? A Western liberal Democrat? Of course not. So where we stand right now is a Hamas that is managing to hold not well, getting badly beaten up. There's an Israeli operation, as I speak, going on in the area of Deir al-Balach, in areas where the IDF has not operated at all since October 7th, breaking into new areas, doing new damage. But these things don't bother Mr. Sinwar, as long as he sees a route to victory. His route to victory is Iranian and Hezbollah escalation. So once again, he's not going to make a deal to prevent that. It's exactly what you want. That's where we stand at the moment. This is one of those many cases where I hope I'm wrong, but I am sure that I'm not. And next time, if there are no new developments on this front, we'll talk about what's going on in the north as things escalate up here. So once again, it's August 21st, Wednesday afternoon in Israel. Be well, stay safe, stay engaged.
Thank you for listening to Conflict Uncovered. As always, it's been another rough day in the Middle East. We hope you found this episode insightful and engaging. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, share and recommend with your friends, and review our podcast on your favorite platform. For more in-depth analysis and exclusive content, join our community and follow us on social media. Stay tuned for our next episode as we continue to explore the critical issues shaping the Middle East and the world. Until next time, stay informed and stay safe.